The laughter hit first, not the challenge, not the insult, the laughter. The world karate champion leaned toward the live TV cameras, pointed at Bruce Lee and said, "He's fast for a movie man." The audience loved it. Bruce didn't even blink. Los Angeles, October 1972. Channel 11, Studios, Burbank. Friday night, 8:07 p.m. A live martial arts special called Masters of Combat had turned one soundstage into a hot little arena of folding chairs, bright lamps, floor cameras, and spectators packed close enough to hear every change in breathing. They came expecting demonstrations and controlled sparring. What they got instead was a reigning karate champion trying to make Bruce Lee the joke of the night. Before we go any further, subscribe to the channel, because this story began with a few smug laughs under studio lights and ended with a man who had built his name on humiliating others, asking, in front of everyone, for it to stop. The host, Alan Mercer, knew almost nothing about fighting and exactly everything about tension. He had spent the first half hour grinning into the camera and saying things like, "Tonight, old debates are finally settled," because he could feel ratings building in the room. And then there was the champion, Rick Kane. 31 years old, 6 feet tall, 188 pounds, current world karate title holder on the international circuit. He was not a fraud. That made him worse. He was skilled enough to beat most men in the room and famous enough to believe nobody there could embarrass him. He had already smashed boards, bullied a regional kickboxing champion in an exhibition round, and talked over the host 3 times. Each time the audience rewarded him. Bruce Lee was not on the poster. That mattered. He was listed only as a guest demonstrator and consultant, not the main event, not the attraction. Just Bruce Lee, seated a few rows off the mat in a black jacket and dark shirt, still enough that some people ignored him and others couldn't stop checking where he was. A few younger fighters recognized him instantly. Some of the older karate men dismissed him as a fast-handed actor with opinions. Kane noticed him early, not as a threat, as an opportunity. The mistake happened at 8:26 p.m. Mercer finished a segment on fighting philosophies and decided the show needed spark. He turned toward center mat, microphone in hand. "Rick," he said, "you've been very clear tonight about what works in real combat. We happen to have Bruce Lee with us. Do the two of you agree on anything?" That was all Kane needed. He turned toward Bruce before the question was finished. "Agreement," he said, loud enough for the crowd in the control room. "On what? Choreography?" The front rows laughed. Bruce stayed seated. Mercer should have moved on. Instead, he leaned in. "You don't think Kung Fu belongs in the same conversation?" he asked. Kane smiled, slow and mean. "I think movies belong in theaters, dancing belongs on stage, and if a man wants to call what he does fighting, he should try it with someone who hits back." Bigger laughter this time. The nearest camera cut to Bruce. That was another mistake. Because Bruce did not give them anger, he gave them attention, calm, direct, almost curious attention, like a man hearing somebody reveal the exact size of his own limits. No twitch in the jaw, no forced grin, nothing for the crowd to feed on. Mercer lowered the microphone toward him. "Bruce, do you want to answer that?" The room changed. Bruce stood. No hurry, no drama. He rose from the folding chair and walked to the edge of the light. He was smaller than Kane, lighter by at least 40 pounds, but the eye went to him instantly. Some people command attention by demanding it. Bruce did it by wasting none of his movement. He stopped at the edge of the mat. Mercer held the microphone up. Bruce spoke softly enough that the studio mics had to catch it. "Are you finished?" It was not witty. That was why it landed. Kane laughed and spread his arms. "You want more?" Bruce looked straight at him. "You seem to." The sound in the audience changed. Not laughter now, something tighter. Kane stepped toward center mat. "I've seen your demonstrations, fast hands, nice poses, good for cameras. But out here with somebody in front of you who isn't paid to fall down, that's another world." Bruce nodded once. "Then why talk?" A few people in the audience reacted before they could stop themselves. Mercer's smile flickered. One of Kane's cornermen stopped grinning and started watching Bruce's feet. Kane heard the room shifting and pushed harder. "Because men like you hide behind mystique," he said. "Philosophy, speed drills, film cuts. People buy it because they've never seen a real champion pressure you. Put him on the mat with me for 10 seconds and all of Hollywood finds out what's real. A wave moved through the audience. 10 seconds. That was no longer mockery. That was a public challenge, sharpened for live television. Bruce tilted his head slightly. 10 seconds? Kane grinned. That more than enough? Bruce almost smiled then, but there was nothing friendly in it. Mercer jumped in, voice bright and nervous. Now, gentlemen, we are not trying to start an actual fight here. That's exactly what you're trying to do, someone in the crowd said. Nobody laughed because it was true. Bruce stepped onto the mat, just one pace, not enough to perform, just enough to remove all doubt. Kane squared up instinctively, a tiny adjustment in the lead foot, shoulders tightening, chin settling lower. Bruce saw everything, the lead hand, the front knee bounce, the slight flare in Kane's elbow before he wanted to punch hard, the way his rear hip loaded when he wanted power. To everyone else, two martial artists were facing each other. To Bruce, habits were speaking out loud. Kane mistook the silence for hesitation and went looking for one more laugh. "What is it?" he called. "No director to help you?" That got the biggest laugh of the night, and finally Bruce's expression changed, not to anger, to decision. He turned to the host first. "You asked for an answer." Mercer swallowed. "I did." Bruce gestured lightly toward Kane. "Then give him one." The room froze. Kane's smile stayed on his face one beat too long. He had expected a speech, maybe a refusal dressed up as philosophy. He had not expected Bruce to accept so cleanly that the insult came back on him. Mercer cleared his throat. "Bruce, to be clear, are you agreeing to a controlled exchange?" Bruce looked at Kane, not at the host. "Controlled," he said. "Depends on him." For the first time that night, Kane's jaw tightened, because buried inside that calm answer was something every real fighter understands immediately. Bruce was not treating this like a gamble. He was treating it like a conclusion. Nobody in the studio moved for a full second after Bruce said it. That silence mattered more than all the laughter before it. A moment earlier, the crowd had been watching a famous champion toy with a smaller man under bright lights. Now they were watching the smaller man stand on the mat, as if he had already seen the ending and found it uncomplicated. Alan Mercer looked toward the producer's booth behind the glass wall. Red lights glowed above the cameras. Floor staff froze with their cue cards half lifted. Somebody in the control room was almost certainly shouting for legal. None of that changed the one thing that now controlled the entire soundstage. Rick Kane had publicly demanded 10 seconds, and Bruce Lee had accepted in front of everyone. Mercer forced a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Let's be careful here," he said into the microphone. "We are talking about a demonstration, nothing unsanctioned, nothing reckless." Kane never looked at him. "I'm fine," he said. Bruce answered without turning his head. "He thinks he is." A low sound rolled through the seats, not laughter this time, that softer, meaner noise people make when they sense blood in the water but haven't decided whose it will be. Mercer stepped backward, buying distance from both men. "All right. A controlled exchange. Very limited contact. Just enough to illustrate the difference in styles." Bruce's eyes stayed on Kane. "There is no difference in styles if a man cannot control distance." Kane gave a short laugh. "There it is. Philosophy." Bruce said nothing. That was when Kane started getting irritated. He needed an emotional opponent, a defensive one, or an angry one. Somebody he could herd with words before he touched them. Bruce refused every invitation. He did not argue. He did not posture. He simply stood where he was, feet light, shoulders loose, hands resting lower than the audience expected. To people who did not fight, he looked casual. To the few in the room who really understood violence, he looked dangerous in the worst possible way, like a man with no wasted intention. Kane rolled his shoulders and stepped toward the tape-marked center. "How do you want this?" he asked. "Point fighting? Continuous? Or should I clap first so your fans know when to start screaming?" Still, Bruce did not react. The karate champion's grin sharpened. He turned slightly, not enough to break stance, just enough to include the audience. "He doesn't like this now," he said. "He liked it better from the chair." A section of the crowd rewarded him. One of the commentators, Frank Delaney, leaned toward his desk mic. "Kane's trying to get under his skin. That's smart. Lee's quick, no question, but pressure changes people. His broadcast partner, a retired judo coach named Harris, kept staring at the mat. Maybe, he said quietly. Or maybe Kane's talking because he hasn't noticed Lee isn't listening. That line did not go out loudly enough for the audience to hear, but men wearing headsets near the commentary table turned toward Harris. He was not a dramatic man. If he said something, it usually meant he had seen it clearly. Bruce raised one hand at last, not to threaten, just a small motion toward Kane's chest. You said 10 seconds. Kane nodded. Bruce said, then when it begins, do not stop moving. Somebody in the second row actually laughed at that, assuming it was Bruce trying to sound clever. Kane smiled too, but it was thinner now. Why? Kane asked. You planning to run? Bruce's voice stayed level. Because if you stop, you will understand too early. That landed differently. The audience could feel it even if they could not explain it. The sentence was too calm to be theater, too specific. Kane heard the change in the room and made the only choice available to a proud man who has started to feel a little uncertainty in front of a crowd. He doubled down. He snapped his GI sleeves, settled into a fighting stance, and began to bounce lightly on the balls of his feet. He wanted the cameras to register his readiness. His lead hand floated high, his rear fist close to the chin, weight alive, hips ready to fire. It was a good stance, efficient, disciplined, built by years of repetition. The problem was not that Kane lacked skill. The problem was that Bruce was already reading the rhythm inside it. Mercer licked his lips. On my signal, he said. Light contact only. Bruce took a half step left. Kane noticed. Too late, Bruce thought. Not with contempt, just fact. Because that tiny angle change had pulled Bruce off the center line without announcing anything to the room. To an audience, it was almost invisible. To a fighter, it altered the geometry of the exchange before it began. Kane would have to adjust if he came straight in. Men under pressure often hate adjusting. They attacked through the line they already chose. Bruce knew he would. Mercer raised his hand. Ready? Kane nodded once. Bruce did not nod at all. Mercer chopped the air down. What happened next was so fast that half the room remembered it wrong. Kane exploded forward exactly as Bruce expected, driving off the rear leg with the kind of committed burst that had overwhelmed countless opponents in tournament space. He wanted to storm Bruce backward, force him upright, and land something loud enough for the audience to hear. Not necessarily a knockout. He wanted humiliation, a hard entry, a clean strike, a public recoil. Something that would turn Bruce Lee from a difficult presence into a story everyone in the room could laugh about later. He never got the first picture he wanted. Bruce did not retreat straight back. The instant Kane launched, Bruce slid off the line and cut the distance at the same time. It looked wrong to the crowd because most people expect the smaller man to flee range, not erase it. Bruce's lead hand flashed like a crack of light and hit Kane's attacking arm before the strike fully formed, jamming it at the shoulder line. Not a block. A disruption. In the same beat, Bruce's other hand touched Kane's face, not hard enough to injure, but sharp enough to blind his focus for half a breath, and his front foot landed outside Kane's lead leg. Kane's structure broke. Only for an instant. But an instant is all somebody like Bruce needs. The audience gasped, not because they understood what had happened, but because the champion who had entered so confidently was suddenly no longer where he expected to be. His momentum had been stolen and turned, his upper body twisted one way, his base another. Bruce was no longer in front of him. Bruce was beside him. A scatter of nervous laughter rose and died immediately. Kane tried to recover by muscling through. That was his second mistake. Bruce checked the shoulder, threaded inside the line, and sent a second strike so fast the front rows heard it more than saw it. A dry, snapping contact high on the chest that froze Kane's breath. Before Kane could reset, Bruce's forearm folded across his balance point, and his hand settled under the jawline with terrifying accuracy. Not a wild grab, a precise claim. Everything below it belonged to Bruce now. 3 seconds, maybe 4. The world champion was not attacking anymore. He was trying not to fall. Mercer had taken 2 involuntary steps backward. The audience had gone silent enough to hear shoe friction on canvas. One camera operator forgot to pan and held too long on empty space because he could not believe the exchange had moved that far that fast. Kane shoved instinctively, desperate to regain room. Bruce gave him none. He shifted with him like water taking the shape of a crack, trapped the arm, stole the angle again, and placed him in something far worse than embarrassment. Control. Pure, humiliating control. If Bruce drove forward, Kane would go down hard. If Bruce turned the wrist and pressed the jaw the way he clearly could, something in Kane's neck or shoulder would suffer for it. If Bruce chose to strike instead of hold, the opening was there. For the first time all night, Kane's eyes changed. The crowd could see that even from a distance. Mockery vanished. Certainty vanished. What replaced it was the raw and private expression of a fighter recognizing, one beat too late, that the man in front of him is operating on a level he did not prepare for. Bruce did not tighten further. He just looked at him. "Continue," Bruce said softly. Kane tried. His legs refused the lie. He gave a short strained sound as Bruce adjusted pressure by what looked like almost nothing. To the audience, it was barely a movement. To Kane, it was a message written directly into bone and balance. "I am holding you together, and I can stop." The studio heard him then, not loud, not dramatic, but unmistakable. Stop. The word landed like broken glass. For one impossible second, nobody in the studio reacted. It was as if the entire room had heard the champion say the one word he had built his reputation to never say, and everyone needed time to decide whether they had actually heard it or whether the lights, the speed, and the shock had distorted it in the air. Bruce released him immediately. That made it worse. No flourish, no shove, no look to the audience. He simply removed the pressure, stepped back half a pace, and let Rick Kane stand on his own feet again. The champion staggered anyway. A few people in the front rows gasped. One woman clapped once by accident and then stopped, horrified by the sound of it in the silence. Mercer was the first to move. He rushed forward with the microphone, smiling too widely, the desperate smile of a man whose show had just crossed into something real and had no idea whether that was good television or a live disaster. "Well," he said, voice cracking on the first syllable, "that was, clearly, a very fast exchange." "No," Kane snapped. The word came out harsher than he intended. He straightened, rolled one shoulder, then the other, buying time. His chest was still not working normally. The strike Bruce had touched him with had not looked violent, but it had taken the air out of him in a way the audience could not understand and he could not explain without sounding weak. Worse, he could still feel how close Bruce had been to turning control into damage. Mercer tried again. "Rick, perhaps what we just saw was—" "I said no." Now the room moved, whispers first, then shifting bodies, then the low electric hum of a crowd realizing the script was not just broken, it was gone. Kane turned toward Bruce, face tighter than before, and gave a short laugh that fooled nobody. "You caught an angle," he said. "That's all." Bruce said nothing. Kane hated that instantly. Because silence had become the most expensive thing on the mat. Every second Bruce refused to argue, the audience leaned harder toward him. Not because he was louder, because he looked like the only man there who already understood what had happened. Frank Delaney at commentary recovered his voice first. "If you're just joining us, the world karate champion issued a 10-second challenge, and Bruce Lee neutralized him almost immediately. Kane is disputing the exchange." Harris cut in, low and blunt. "He's disputing it because he felt it." That reached the room through the studio monitors. Kane heard it, so did everyone else. He turned toward the commentary table. "You want to say that closer?" Harris did not blink. "You asked a skilled man to show you the truth." He did. A strange sound moved through the audience then, part approval, part discomfort. People had come for spectacle. What they were getting now was humiliation, and humiliation is exciting only until it starts feeling deserved. Kane pointed at Bruce. "Do it again," Mercer's head snapped around. "Rick, I don't think—" "Do it again," Kane repeated, louder now. "He jumped early. He intercepted before the exchange settled. That proves nothing." Bruce finally spoke. It proved enough for you." A ripple went through the room. Kane stepped forward fast, not fully attacking, but with enough force that two floor managers instinctively moved. "Don't do that," he said. Bruce's eyes stayed level. "Do what?" "Talk to me like you've already won." Bruce gave the smallest shrug. "Then stop giving evidence." The audience reacted before Kane did, not a full laugh this time. Worse. Short, sharp bursts from different corners of the room, the kind men remember long after the event itself. Kane's face changed color under the heat of the lights. He was now trapped inside the oldest live broadcast prison there is, Pride with witnesses. If he walked away, millions would imagine the rest. If he exploded, Bruce would look even calmer by comparison. If he demanded another exchange and lost again, the first humiliation would become permanent. Bruce knew it. Kane knew it. The room knew it. Mercer lifted both hands. "Gentlemen, we are not turning this into a brawl. If there is any further demonstration, it will be controlled, technical, and brief." "Technical," Kane said, eyes fixed on Bruce. "Good, then explain it." Bruce looked at him for a moment, then at Mercer. "You want explanation?" Mercer nodded too quickly. "Yes, please." Bruce stepped to the center of the mat. "Come here." Kane hesitated, only a half second, but it was visible. That half second did more damage to him than the control hold had. Before tonight, he moved through rooms like a man who assumed space would make way for him. Now, in front of the same audience, he had to think before stepping toward Bruce Lee. He came in anyway. Bruce gestured lightly. "Take your stance." Kane did. This time the bounce was smaller, guard higher, chin tucked harder. He had stopped performing for the audience and started trying to protect himself, and even people who knew nothing about fighting could sense the difference. Bruce addressed Mercer, but loud enough for the room. "He enters with commitment and expects retreat. That is common. It works often." Kane said coldly, "Against people who don't know how to stand." Bruce nodded. "Yes." That answer bothered Kane more than an insult would have. Bruce continued. "He believes pressure is the same as control. It is not." Without warning, Bruce touched Kane's lead arm with 2 fingers. Kane flinched. The audience caught it. Another small sound spread through the room. Bruce didn't even glance toward them. "Too much tension," he said. "Here." He touched the shoulder line. "And here." A light indication at the hip. When tension arrives early, intention arrives early. Then the body tells on itself. Kane's voice hardened. "You're narrating." "Fight!" Bruce looked at him. "You already asked me to stop once." That landed like a slap. Mercer turned away for half a second, one hand over his mouth, pretending to adjust his mic. Frank Delaney actually laughed on air, then coughed to cover it. Kane heard all of it. So he did what proud men do when restraint begins to feel identical to shame. He lunged, not with the same clean commitment as before. This one was fueled by emotion, and emotion leaves fingerprints in motion. Bruce saw it before the first muscle finished firing. He shifted just enough to erase the line, raised a hand no more dramatic than a person brushing dust from a sleeve, and Kane's strike met emptiness. Then Bruce touched him again. That was all. A stop hit to the chest, a check at the forearm, a turn at the ankle. No heavy impact, no cinematic blow. But Kane's body froze mid-intent, his balance stolen before his attack had even fully become an attack. Bruce was standing inside his structure again, eyes calm, one hand poised where the throat had opened. He did not apply pressure. He didn't need to. The room saw the answer this time, not because it happened slower, because Bruce wanted them to. Kane backed out quickly, pretending he had chosen to disengage. "That's not continuous." Bruce lowered his hand. "You cannot get to continuous." The crowd broke. Not all at once, but enough. Laughter from the back, a stunned exhale from the front, scattered applause from people who had been trying not to choose sides and no longer could pretend neutrality. Kane turned toward the audience with open disgust, but that only deepened the wound. He had spent the night feeding off their reaction. Now the reaction had changed, and he had no way to punish it. One of his own cornermen climbed onto the edge of the floor and called out, "Rick, enough!" Kane rounded on him. "Stay out of it!" The man held his ground. "I said enough." That silenced even the audience, because cornermen know, coaches know. Men who spend years around real exchanges know exactly when ego has started negotiating with danger and calling it courage. The fact that Kane's own side had spoken at all told the room everything it needed. Bruce stepped back from center. "You wanted reality," he said. "Reality does not wait for your comfort." Kane stared at him. Rage was still there, but something else had entered beside it now and would not leave. Doubt. Not the doubt of whether Bruce was fast. That question was dead. Not the doubt of whether Bruce understood contact. Dead too. This was deeper and more humiliating. Doubt in Kane's own reading of men. He had looked at Bruce Lee under television lights and thought he saw a performer. What he had actually seen was a man exercising mercy in public. Mercer felt the room tipping permanently and rushed to seize whatever structure he could salvage. "We'll take a brief pause," he said too loudly. "Just a short reset before the next segment." But nobody was listening to Mercer anymore. Every eye in the studio remained fixed on Bruce and Kane, one man breathing evenly, the other trying to make recovery look like contempt. Kane swallowed, forced his shoulders loose, and pointed once at Bruce. "This isn't finished," he said. Bruce looked at him as if the sentence itself had no weight. Then he answered with the calmest cruelty of the night. "It was finished before you understood it." The break never really happened. Mercer announced one, the stagehands moved as if one had been called, and the red tally light on camera 2 went dark for all of 3 seconds before the control room changed its mind. Nobody backstage was willing to lose the room now. The producers could feel it. The audience could feel it. Even the sponsors seated near the front, men who had spent the first half of the evening nodding through polite demonstrations and rehearsed applause, had stopped pretending this was just another television special. Something rare had happened on live air. Arrogance had met precision and failed so publicly that the room no longer trusted the loudest man in it. Mercer got the message through his earpiece and swallowed. "We are staying with this," he said, trying to sound intentional instead of trapped. "Ladies and gentlemen, rather than speculation, perhaps the clearest thing would be one final technical demonstration." Kane turned toward him so fast the host flinched. "One final," Kane said. "No, a real one." Mercer kept the microphone between them like it could protect him. "Rick, we are not sanctioning a fight." Kane didn't even hear him. He was staring at Bruce with the fixed, hot expression of a man trying to build himself back together from the outside. The first exchange had humiliated him. The second had educated the audience. That was worse. It meant people were no longer just reacting to surprise. They were learning what Bruce was doing, and every lesson cost Kane more status. "You keep touching and stepping," Kane said. "Little traps, little interruptions. You want to prove something? Stand and trade." Bruce's answer came at once. "Why would I agree to your strengths when you refuse to respect mine?" That hit harder than the audience reaction. Kane had no reply ready because it was exactly true. He had mocked Bruce as a performer, demanded terms that favored pressure and spectacle, then complained when real structure and timing destroyed him before the exchange could become a brawl. The room understood that now. You could see it in the faces. Earlier, people had leaned toward Kane when he spoke. Now they looked at Bruce first. Kane heard the silence again and rushed to fill it. "You won't stand there because you know what happens." Bruce tilted his head. "I do." Mercer stepped between them before Kane could charge into another mistake. "Then let's do this properly," he said. "Technical only, no force. Bruce, explain what you mean by control." "Rick, you can challenge the explanation. That keeps us safe and keeps it clear." Kane laughed once, bitterly. "Safe for who?" "For you," Harris said from commentary, and the line reached the audience through the monitor speakers. A few people actually applauded that. Kane turned toward the desk with murder in his face, but he could not fight the commentators, the host, the audience, and Bruce Lee all at once. He chose the only ground he thought he could still recover on. "Fine," he said. "Technical. Show everyone your magic." Bruce stepped back onto the center of the mat. "No magic." Kane joined him, though slower this time. His shoulders were looser than before because now he was trying to look loose. That was the problem with being publicly read once. Every adjustment afterward looks like fear pretending to be strategy. Bruce saw that too. "Face me," Bruce said. Kane did. "Now stand how you would stand if you wanted to hurt me." "I don't need instructions for that." "Stand." There was a tiny pause before Kane complied. He settled into stance, high guard, weight ready to drive. Bruce remained almost casual by comparison, hands low, posture clean, gaze fixed at the center line. The contrast itself had become humiliating. Kane looked like effort. Bruce looked like economy. Bruce spoke to the audience without taking his eyes off him. A man tells you what he wants before he moves, not with words, with preparation. Kane snapped, "Then stop talking and read me." Bruce took one step forward. That was all. No strike, no feint. Just one direct step into a range most men dislike unless they're already attacking. Kane reacted anyway. His lead shoulder tightened, weight shifted a fraction too hard to the rear leg, right hand preparing to launch. Bruce stopped. There. A murmur moved through the crowd. Kane forced himself still. "Everybody twitches," Bruce nodded. "Yes, but not everybody knows why." He gestured to the lead shoulder. "That loads early when you're angry. Then the chest. This rises when you want power. Then the eyes. These fix before you commit. That tells me the line. Then, lightly, with 2 fingers in the air near Kane's ribs, and your breath shortens before your first burst. That tells me when." No one laughed now. They were too busy watching Kane to see if it was true. It was. The champion hated them for noticing. "You're narrating normal movement," he said. Bruce shook his head. "No, I'm showing everyone why you cannot hide." Kane stepped in abruptly, trying to interrupt the lesson by force of presence. Bruce did not retreat. He simply changed angle 1 small degree, and Kane's entry looked wrong again, as if the champion had walked into a doorframe only he could not see. Bruce's hand touched the attacking line, redirected it without impact, and he arrived at Kane's flank before the audience processed the path. Bruce froze there. One palm rested near the jaw. His other hand controlled the arm at the seam of the shoulder and elbow. His front foot had claimed outside position again. The hold was not dramatic. That was what made it awful. Kane looked captured by almost nothing. Bruce released him instantly and stepped back. "Again," he said. The audience reacted before Kane could. This time it was not laughter. It was a collective exhale, the kind people make when they realize the same answer will keep appearing no matter how often the question changes. Kane reset, jaw tight. "You're jumping the start," Bruce said. "There is no start, only intention." Kane came again, sharper, trying to disguise the entry. Bruce read the disguise faster than the first version. A small touch at the wrist, a pressure at the biceps line, one short step inside, and suddenly Bruce's forearm was across Kane's structure while his rear hand hovered over an opening that made several men in the front row wince. Release. "Again," Bruce said. This was no longer sparring, it was public disassembly. The producers should have cut to commercial. Mercer should have ended it. But nobody wanted to be the person who interrupted the cleanest reversal anyone in that studio had ever seen. Ratings no longer mattered. Curiosity did. Every person there wanted to know how many times the same truth could be demonstrated before pride collapsed under it. Kane circled. Good. Fast. Legitimately dangerous. The audience brightened a little, sensing he had finally chosen movement over force. Bruce nodded once, almost approvingly. "Better," Bruce said. "Now you are thinking." Kane attacked off the circle with a lower line this time, trying to change level and crash through Bruce's timing. For the first fraction of a second, it looked promising. Then, Bruce intercepted at the point of decision, not the point of impact. He jammed the motion before it matured, turned Kane with a shoulder check so precise it looked like coincidence, and landed behind his line again. A sound came out of Kane then, not pain. Frustration so deep it had nowhere clean to go. Bruce released him once more. "You're chasing recovery," Bruce said. "That makes you late." Kane spun around. "Hit me then." Mercer actually stepped backward off the mat. The challenge hung there. Kane's chest rose and fell. He was beyond saving face now. He wanted a heavy strike because a heavy strike could be explained. Strength, aggression, bad temper, a lucky shot. Those are familiar things. But being controlled lightly in front of an audience, again and again, by a man who looked almost relaxed, that was unbearable. It rewrote hierarchy in real time. Bruce studied him for a moment. Then he did something worse than hitting him. He raised one hand and stopped it an inch from Kane's face. That was all. No contact. Kane flinched anyway. Not much, barely anything. But the studio saw it, the cameras saw it, the commentators saw it. Most unbearable of all, Kane felt it. Bruce lowered his hand. "You are fighting what you think I might do." Kane said nothing. Bruce continued, his voice calm, almost instructional. "That is why you are losing before movement finishes. Your mind is ahead of your body, but not in the right direction. You are imagining damage instead of solving position." The champion's face hardened into something ugly and exhausted. "Say it plain." Bruce did. "You're afraid now." Nobody moved. Mercer stared at the floor. Frank Delaney forgot his next line completely. Even Harris, who had seen more than most men in the room, stayed silent for a beat because there was no cleaner way to put it. Kane took one half-step forward, then stopped himself. He had finally learned enough to know that charging Bruce from anger would only repeat the lesson. But stopping after that half-step was its own admission. Bruce watched the decision happen in real time, and the audience watched Bruce watching it. That was the moment the room turned fully. Not during the first stop, not during the second interception, here. Because everyone could now see the split inside Kane, the part that still wanted to attack, and the part that no longer trusted its own read of what Bruce would do next. A world champion standing under studio lights, measuring not courage, but consequence. Bruce gave him a path out. "Enough," he said. Kane lifted his eyes. "You don't get to dismiss me." Bruce answered with no heat at all. "Then continue." Kane didn't move. The silence that followed lasted only a few seconds. It felt much longer. Then one of Kane's own team climbed fully onto the floor. His coach, Tom Vassar, a square-faced veteran with the posture of a man who had spent half his life around rings and mats, walked straight past Mercer and stopped at Kane's shoulder. "That's it," Vassar said quietly. Kane didn't look at him. "Get off the mat." Vassar stayed where he was. "I warned you before the show. I'm warning you now." Kane's voice dropped. "Don't do this here," Vassar answered in the same low tone, but the nearest microphones caught enough. "You already did." That line passed through the room like a knife, because it confirmed what everybody had begun to suspect. Someone on Kane's own side had known this could happen. Not the exact shape of it, perhaps, not the exact speed, but the possibility of it. The danger of provoking Bruce Lee in public had not been invisible to people who knew what they were looking at. It had been visible. Kane had ignored it. Bruce stepped off the line and gave them space. He didn't need to stand over the moment. It belonged to him anyway. Mercer, voice small now, asked the only question he could think of. "Rick, do you wish to continue?" Kane kept his eyes on Bruce for another long second. Then he said, "No." Nobody applauded when Rick Kane said no. That was the ugliest part of it. Applause would have let him pretend the room still saw this as entertainment, a dramatic segment, a strange little television incident that everyone could package and forget by morning. But the audience gave him something worse than noise. They gave him recognition, not of his title, not of his courage, recognition of what had just happened to him. Mercer lowered the microphone slowly, as if any sudden movement might crack what was left of the set. Kane stood beside his coach, chest still rising harder than he wanted, eyes fixed on nothing for half a second too long. Bruce had already stepped away from center mat and was rolling his shoulders once, lightly, not from fatigue but from the same economy with which he did everything else. He looked like the only man in the studio whose pulse had not changed all night. The floor manager rushed in with a headset pressed hard to one ear. "We're staying live," he hissed to Mercer. Mercer stared at him. "On what?" "On this. They want aftermath. Keep them out there." Of course they did. In the booth above the soundstage, producers were now doing the fastest math in television. Outrage, tension, silence, humiliation, names, headlines by morning. Nobody in that booth cared which martial art had looked better tonight. They cared that the air in the room had changed, and millions at home could feel it through a screen. Mercer pinched the bridge of his nose, put the smile back on his face like a man applying a bandage to a broken window, and turned to the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "we're going to take just a brief—" "No," Kane said. Every head turned. His coach angled toward him. "Rick?" Kane ignored him. His eyes were back on Bruce now, but not with the hot recklessness from earlier. That had burned off. What remained was colder, more dangerous in one way, more revealing in another. Pride had stopped trying to impress the audience. Now it wanted repair. "I'm not ending it like that," Kane said. Mercer actually took a step away from him. "You just did." Kane didn't look at the host. Not to him. Bruce stood near the edge of the mat with his hands at his sides. "Then choose better words." That drew a reaction from the back rows, a low burst of cruel appreciation, and Kane shut his eyes for one brief second. He could hear the room turning every time Bruce opened his mouth, not because Bruce was speaking more, because every sentence cost nothing to say. Coach Tom Vassar moved in front of Kane now, forcing eye contact. "Listen to me," he said in a tone too low for the crowd but loud enough for the nearest microphones. "You don't need another exchange. You need to leave with what's still yours." Kane's jaw flexed. "He embarrassed me." Vassar didn't blink. "No, you did that before you ever stepped in." That reached the front rows, then the second rows. Then the studio monitors carried just enough of it into the room for everybody else to reconstruct the meaning. Mercer saw it happen and tried to cut across it fast. "Tom, perhaps we should move this backstage." "Backstage!" Kane snapped. "Why? So everyone can say I quit?" Vassar turned, furious now. "You're not hearing me. I told you before the show not to bait him. I told you in the green room. I told you when you started talking big during makeup. And I told you again before you walked out for the second half. You wanted this on camera. Now it's on camera." The whole studio went still. There it was. Fully spoken now. No more suggestion, no more implication. Kane had been warned and had done it anyway. Frank Delaney at commentary leaned toward his mic without taking his eyes off the mat. "That may be the most important thing we've heard all night," Harris answered quietly. "Yes, because it means the mistake wasn't technical. It was personal." Kane heard that and swung toward the desk. "Will somebody shut them up?" Bruce answered before anyone else could. "You had many chances to stop." That struck Kane harder than the commentators had, because it was true on every level. He could have stopped after the first joke, after the first warning look from his coach, after the first exchange, after the first word, "stop," came out of his own mouth. But every exit had felt like surrender because he had built the whole night on dominance. Men like that do not know how to leave a room smaller than when they entered it. Mercer glanced desperately toward the booth. The floor manager touched his headset again and mouthed, "Keep going." So Mercer did the only thing left. He tried to civilize disaster. "All right," he said, forcing breath into his voice. "No more open exchanges. But perhaps for clarity, one last controlled demonstration. Not a contest, a measured sequence. Bruce, Rick, under clear limits." Vassar started to object. Kane spoke over him. "Yes." The coach turned on him immediately. "No." Kane's eyes never left Bruce. "You said I shouldn't leave with nothing. I'm not." Vassar lowered his voice. "You're already past the point where this helps." Kane finally looked at him. "Then let me find out." It was the wrong answer. Vassar knew it. Mercer knew it. Half the audience knew it. But pride had now hardened into the only shape it knows when injured in public. Ritual. Kane needed one more attempt, not because he believed he would win cleanly, but because the part of him that still saw himself as champion could not survive if the last visible image remained. Bruce controlling him like an impatient teacher handling a loud student. Bruce stepped back to center without being asked. That was the cruelest mercy of the night. He kept accepting. Mercer raised a hand. "Technical only," he repeated. "No force. Rick, do you understand?" Kane nodded once. "Bruce?" Bruce said. "I understand." He did not say yes. The audience noticed that too. This time the mat felt smaller. Kane came forward more carefully. No bounce now. No showmanship. No smile for the cameras. He was finally moving like a man in a real problem. His guard was tighter, elbows cleaner, feet less eager to burst. It was smarter. It was also tragic, because intelligence arriving late in front of witnesses looks almost identical to fear. Bruce saw the change and gave him something he had not given him all night. Respect. Not soft respect. Not approval. But a real fighter's acknowledgement that the other man had at last stopped performing and started trying to survive. "Better," Bruce said. Kane heard it and mistook it for condescension. He entered on a broken rhythm, hiding the start better than before, stepping in once, pausing, then launching off the pause with a sharper line toward Bruce's body. It was his best entry of the evening. The front rows leaned forward. Even Harris shifted in his chair. Bruce's response was almost invisible. A small outside angle, a light parry that never became a slap. His lead foot stole position before Kane's rear shoulder completed its drive. Bruce touched the center line with one hand, turned the shoulder seam with the other, and Kane's body betrayed him all at once. His base narrowed, his hips faced the wrong direction, his attack died halfway to becoming dangerous. Bruce did not strike. He simply placed two fingers against the opening under Kane's ribs and held them there. The audience made a strange, involuntary sound, because everyone understood what the gesture meant even without technical knowledge. If those fingers had been force instead of restraint, Kane would have folded. Bruce released him. Kane backed out at once, breathing through his nose, trying to absorb the answer without letting the room see how deeply it landed. Mercer rushed in. "That appears to be, again," Kane said. Vassar covered his face with one hand. Bruce stayed where he was. "You are learning," he said. Kane took that as insult and came in faster, this time high, then low, trying to force Bruce to commit to the wrong read. Bruce did not bite on either level. He intercepted the transition itself, split the line between them, and arrived inside Kane's frame so early that the champion's second movement collapsed before the first one ended. Bruce's palm settled on the sternum. Not pushing, just there. Absolute claim over range, release. This time, there was applause, not loud, not celebratory. More like the audience had finally accepted that they were no longer watching a rivalry or a debate. They were watching one man prove a fact repeatedly until denial became embarrassing for everyone involved. Kane heard the applause, and something inside him gave way. Not all at once, not with drama. It showed first in the shoulders, then in the mouth, then in the eyes. The heat left them. In its place came the one expression no champion ever once caught by studio cameras after challenging a man in public: understanding. He turned away from Bruce and faced the audience for a moment, as if looking at them might help him find another role to play. There wasn't one. He could not be the aggressor now, could not be the entertainer, could not be the victim. His only honest option was the one he had resisted from the first laugh. Bruce saw it before anyone else. "Enough," he said again. This time, Kane did not argue. He stood with his hands at his sides, breathing hard, and gave one tiny nod that only the nearest people would fully see. Vassar stepped onto the mat immediately, placed a hand on his shoulder, and did not remove it. Mercer moved in carefully, voice suddenly gentle, as if the whole studio had wandered into a church after starting the night in a circus. "Rick," he said, "for the record, do you believe what happened here was skill?" Kane looked at Bruce. Bruce looked back without hostility. That was the final wound. No anger to fight, no triumph to resent, just certainty. Kane swallowed once. "Yes," he said. The word yes did not save Rick Kane. It just made the room honest. Mercer held the microphone in both hands now, not because he needed to, but because his fingers had started betraying him. The host had spent the night chasing excitement and now stood inside a silence so complete that every breath, every shoe shift, every nervous throat clear felt amplified by the studio walls. Kane remained where he was, his coach still beside him, one hand fixed on his shoulder like a stake driven into loose ground. Bruce stood a few feet away, posture easy, gaze steady, as if the whole thing had never become personal for him at all. That difference was the final lesson. Kane had made the night personal from the first laugh. Bruce had never needed to. Mercer cleared his throat. "Then for the record," he said carefully, "you acknowledge what Mr. Lee demonstrated here was not luck." Kane's jaw tightened again, but there was no fight left in the denial. He looked at the audience first, maybe hoping to find a few loyal faces still willing to carry him back toward dignity. What he found instead were rows of people waiting to hear whether he would lie one last time in front of them. He looked at Bruce after that. That was worse, because Bruce was giving him the one thing Kane no longer knew how to handle: room. No crowding, no smirk, no victory pose. Just room to choose what kind of man he would be for the final minute of the night. Kane exhaled slowly. Not luck, he said. Mercer nodded, almost too fast. And the control? Cain did not answer immediately. His eyes dropped once to Bruce's hands, the same hands he had mocked as theatrical, the same hands that had touched him lightly, repeatedly, and each time left him more aware of how close he had come to being damaged without ever actually being hurt. People in the audience could see him remembering it. That was the brutal part. The memory was visible. Mercer softened his voice. Rick? Cain swallowed. He controlled the whole exchange. The room reacted, but very quietly. Not applause, not laughter. Just that human sound of a crowd collectively receiving the truth at last. Frank Delaney leaned toward the commentary microphone. That may be the statement of the night, Harris answered. It should be. Cain heard them and, for once, did not turn toward the desk. He seemed suddenly older under the lights, not physically older, structurally older, the way a man can age in real time when certainty leaves him and does not come back. Mercer sensed the moment and pushed one step further. Could he have hurt you? He asked. Vassar closed his eyes, not because he didn't know the answer, because he did. Cain stared at the host with open disbelief for half a second, as if Mercer had violated some final code by forcing the thing into direct language. But the entire night had been built on direct language. Cain himself had insisted on that when the jokes were still working in his favor. He had asked for a public answer. This was the bill. Bruce said nothing. That silence placed all of it back on Cain. He looked down, then back up. His voice came out lower now, stripped of performance. Yes, Mercer, almost whispering, asked. At any point? Cain gave a short laugh with no humor in it. At several. The audience moved then, but again not in triumph, more like release. The truth had finally taken its full shape, and everyone could stop pretending they were waiting for some other version. Mercer turned to Bruce. Do you agree with that? Bruce answered simply. I did not come here to hurt him. Cain shut his eyes for a moment at that, because every man in the room understood the meaning beneath the sentence, not that Bruce could have hurt him in some abstract sense, not that the possibility had floated over the mat like a threat. No. Bruce was saying he had repeatedly decided not to. Over and over, in front of witnesses, while Cain had been trying to humiliate him. That was the wound that would travel farther than the footage. Mercer looked between them. Then why accept it all? Bruce took a second before answering, and when he did, his voice stayed at the same level it had held all night. Because some men only understand contact, he said. Words arrive too softly. No one in the room missed who that was about. Cain didn't deny it. Mercer shifted his weight. Rick, earlier tonight you questioned whether Bruce Lee belonged in a real combat conversation. Do you still believe that? There it was. The sentence Cain had tried to avoid since the first exchange. The original insult, brought back under the lights and placed directly in his hands. Vassar kept his hand on Cain's shoulder, not pushing, not guiding, just there, a reminder that one decent choice still remained available. Cain looked at Bruce a long time. When he spoke, his voice was hoarse enough that some of the front rows leaned forward to catch it. No, he said, I don't. Mercer waited. Cain understood what the wait meant. This was live television. Half-truths die badly in live television. He forced himself to continue. I was wrong. The sentence fell into the studio and stayed there. A woman in the third row put one hand over her mouth. Someone near the back began to clap once, stopped, then let the silence hold. Even the camera operators seemed to move more carefully, like men aware they were recording something none of them had expected to take home. Mercer turned to Bruce again. Would you like to respond? Bruce could have ended Cain there if he wanted. A line for the audience, a smile, a final sting delivered softly enough to become legend by morning. He chose something else. He stepped forward one pace, not threatening, just near enough that Cain had to meet his eyes fully. You train hard, Bruce said. That is clear. Cain said nothing. Bruce continued, but skill is not noise, confidence is not contempt, and a title does not protect a man from truth. Nobody breathed. Bruce's voice never rose. That made every word heavier. When you laugh at what you do not understand, You show weakness before the other man moves. When you need the room on your side before contact begins, you are already asking for help. And when the truth comes, if you are wise, you learn before it has to hurt you. Cain absorbed every word without interruption. There was no expression left in him now that could challenge any of it. Bruce stepped back again. "That's enough," he said. Mercer, who had spent the entire evening trying to control the temperature of the room, finally gave up on control and accepted gravity instead. "Rick," he said quietly, "do you have anything further to say?" Cain stood under the lights, world champion, shoulders squared by habit even now, and gave the only answer still worth giving. He turned toward Bruce, not the audience. "I mocked you," he said. "I shouldn't have." Bruce inclined his head once. Cain went on. "And when you had me, you held back." Bruce answered, "Yes." Cain let out a slow breath. "I know." That was it. No excuses, no complaint about rules, no talk of angles, timing, surprise, or technicalities, no rescue line from pride, just recognition. The audience rose almost by instinct, not everyone at once, and not for Cain. They stood because the room itself had changed shape, and they knew they had been present for it. Some applauded Bruce immediately. Some looked at Cain first, perhaps out of respect for the difficulty of surviving a public collapse without one final lie. Even that was more generosity than he had begun the night with. Bruce did not raise his arms, did not smile for the cameras, did not ask the audience for anything. He simply turned and walked off the mat. That image fixed itself in every mind present, the smaller man leaving the center without hurry, without celebration, without the slightest need to confirm what had already been established. Mercer watched him go with his microphone hanging useless at his side. The commentators didn't speak for several seconds because nothing they added would improve what had just happened. Vassar kept his hand on Cain's shoulder until Bruce reached the edge of the lights. Only then did Cain speak one last time, not loudly, barely above conversation, but the nearest microphone caught it. "He knew from the start," Cain said. Vassar answered just as quietly, "Yes." Cain looked out at the standing crowd, and then toward the dark space Bruce had just disappeared into. For the first time that night, there was no anger left in his face, only the knowledge that 9 seconds had been enough.